Hey guys, TLS here with another Warlords of Draenor beta video. In this video I will be looking at Frost Death Knights. I'm looking into their major changes, their new changed and removed abilities, their new glyphs, their new Draenor perks, and then finally their new changed and removed talents. So, probably the coolest change to Death Knights in Warlords of Draenor is the fact that diseases will no longer dictate the damage on their major abilities. So for Frost Death Knights, this basically means that Obliterate will hit for maximum damage no matter whether or not the diseases Frost Fever and Blood Plague are applied to the target. Before, there were damage modifiers on Obliterate that would increase its damage based on whether or not diseases were applied to the target. Now those damage modifiers have been removed and it will always deal maximum damage. This is a great quality of life change and an improvement for Frost Death Knights in PvP. If you before were trying to hard switch to another target, you had to make sure that you had your diseases applied before you could deal that maximum damage with an Obliterate and really apply pressure. Now you no longer have to worry about that problem. You can immediately open with an Obliterate without having to worry about the diseases. Yes, you will see a DPS loss if you do not have your diseases applied to the target. That's why this change really doesn't affect PvE that much. But in PvP, if you want to hard switch to a target really quickly and open with a powerful Obliterate, or I should say maximum damage Obliterate, you no longer have to worry about the diseases, and it kind of allows you to change your priority. You can open up with the Obliterate or two and then apply your diseases. So it's a great change for Frost Death Knights in Warlords of Draenor, and they'll be able to take advantage of it in PvP. The second major change to Death Knights in Warlords of Draenor is the fact that the 60 and 75 tiers have been switched. Blizzard wanted to give access to leveling DKs, the rune regenerating tier, a little bit earlier than having to wait till level 75. So that is the entire reason why those two rows were switched, was to just give leveling DKs earlier access to that rune regenerating tier. There is one new ability for Death Knights in Warlords of Draenor. You may not consider this a new ability because it's an old glyph, but Dark Sucker is now a passive ability for Death Knights in Warlords of Draenor. It's not a glyph anymore. You no longer have to glyph into it. That was the major glyph that would increase the heal on your Death Strike based on whether or not you had just killed an opponent that granted experience or honor. So that is now passive baseline, just a little buff to survivability out in the open world. There are several changed abilities for Frost Death Knight. The first is Horn of Winter. Horn of Winter now lasts 1 hour. It no longer generates any runic power, and it no longer has the cooldown. So basically it's just a regular raid buff now. That's all it is. Obliterate has absorbed all of the effects of Rhyme directly into it. So Rhyme is no longer an ability. It will no longer appear in your spellbook, but all of its effects have been merged directly into Obliterate. Blood Boil is now kind of the primary disease-spreading AoE ability. They combined Pestilence directly into Blood Boil, and they added Rolling Blood as well, because when you combine the two, Blood Boil and Pestilence, it kind of added Rolling Blood as well. So Blood Boil is literally just a combination of all three abilities into one. This was just an ability reduction of spellbook bloat, so quick change there. Army of the Dead is now instant cast. This is great. It still takes the same amount of time for the ghouls to come out of the ground, but you can now move while casting, and you can no longer be interrupted, while casting Army of the Dead. So that's a great change, especially for PvP. Unholy Aura, in addition to its haste buff, will also grant a versatility buff of 3%, an increase of versatility by 3%. Versatility is a new stat in Warlords of Draenor that basically just is an all-around buff to everything. I mean, I can pull it up right here so you can see. Increases damage healing by percentage and decreases damage taken by percentage. That's versatility. Just overall buff to your health, damage, survivability. Anti-Magic Shell has changed in that it no longer caps out at 50% of your maximum health. Before, Anti-Magic Shell would only absorb up to 50% of your health. Now Anti-Magic Shell will absorb 75% of all magical damage for the entire 5 seconds, regardless of how much, health comparison to you it absorbs. Frost Strike had its cost increased by 5. Just a small kind of change there, kind of just nerfing Frost Strike a little bit. Icebound Fortitude will now only last 8 seconds as opposed to 12 seconds, so a nerf there for Icebound Fortitude. Death Strike will no longer heal based on previous damage done to the player. Instead, Death Strike is just a flat heal. I'm looking at my Death Strike right now. It's just straight 1900 healing out of a Death Strike. That's the way it's going to be now. No complicated formulas. It's just going to be a flat heal. There are several removed abilities for Frost Death Knights. The first is Brittle Bones. Brittle Bones has been removed. Pretty much anything that, applied the physical vulnerability effect has been removed from the game, so I really wouldn't worry about that. Pestilence has been removed, as I mentioned. Basically, it's all been merged into Blood Boil. Blood Strike has been removed. This is an ability no one will miss because I think probably most people don't even remember Blood Strike actually being in their spell book. It hasn't been used in forever. Necrotic Strike has been removed. I know a lot of Death Knights really kind of wanted to keep this ability, but it has been removed from the game like across the board. Any type of healing absorption, something like that, has been removed from the game. Blizzard doesn't want those abilities in the game. And then the slowing of their casting speed, mind-numbing poison and slow from an arcane mage, they received the same treatment. They lost the ability to slow any casting speed. Honestly, healers and deep casting DPS are so immobile now, you really don't need something like Necrotic Strike, the slowing portion of Necrotic Strike. There's no reason to have that because they're all very stationary now. So honestly, in comparison to other classes, it really isn't much of a nerf to lose Necrotic Strike like that. Rune of Sword Breaking, Sword Shattering, Cinder Glacier, and Nerubian Carapace have all been removed. This is just a reduction in runes and keeping the runes that really are important. Raise Dead has been removed from the game for Frost Death Knights. They will no longer be able to raise an undead minion, for the slight DPS boost. And then Death Coil is no longer available to Frost Death Knights. It now shares the ability bar with Frost Strike. So you either, like if you were to switch into a different spec, it would switch into Death Coil. And if you switch back into Frost, it will switch to Frost Strike. That's the way it is now. Lastly, Dark Command has been removed. That was your taunt. Really, you don't need it, so it's a blood ability only now. Frost Death Knights received a, moderate amount of glyphs in Warlords of Draenor. First is Glyph of Absorb Magic. It increases the total damage absorbed by Anti-Magic Shell by 100%, but Anti-Magic Shell no longer generates runic power. It's exclusive with Glyph of Anti-Magic Shell and Glyph of Regenerative Magic. So you can only have one or the other. You cannot have all three. You cannot have one. You can have one. You cannot have all three, and you cannot have two. You can only have one. The next new ability, or glyph, is going to be Glyph of Empowerment. Your Empower Rune weapon also heals you for 30% of your maximum health. So this is a health buff. If you want to use this, you can. Mostly, I can only see PvPers taking it. Empower Rune weapon is a 5-minute cooldown, so you'll have to decide if you really want to just use it for a heal, or you want that, that DPS boost. So, it's an option to you. The next glyph is going to be Glyph of Icy Runes. You gain an additional 10 runic power when you use Chains of Ice. Honestly, as a Frost Death Knight in PvP, I don't use Chains of Ice too much. I love the root effect on it, but with something like Howling Blast, I prefer to not use, you know, Chains of Ice. So this is an option open to you to modify your Chains of Ice, but I don't know how popular it will be in PvP for Warlords, and honestly it won't be used in PvE. Glyph of Outbreak is a new glyph. It's another one that I really don't see being used, mostly because there are a couple of new talents that really kind of really don't make this necessary, but your Outbreak spell no longer has a cooldown and now costs 30 runic power. It's an option, but as we'll discuss when we get to the talents, I just don't see it being as popular. There's Glyph of Raise Ally. Your Raise Ally ability no longer costs any runic power. This is great for PvE when you're in a fight. You know, raid leader calls out for someone to be raised from the dead, and it allows you to do the ability or cast the ability without having to burn any of your runic power. So if you have a free glyph spot, this is something you can take. The last new glyph is going to be Glyph of Runic Power. Whenever you are struck by a movement impairing effect, you will generate 3 runic power every 1 second for 5 seconds. This is, PvP glyph, something you can consider taking. I will tell you that movement impairing effects will be very powerful in Warlords of Draenor, so you might want to be considering taking this because you probably will be snared a lot in Warlords of Draenor. There are a couple of good Draenor perks for Frost Death Knights and Warlords of Draenor. There's Empowered Obliterate, which Obliterate also increases the damage done by Howling Blast and Icy Touch by 20% when it causes them to cost no runes. So, this is basically Empowered Rhyme, if that kind of clears things up for you. Once again, Rhyme has been baked directly into Obliterate, and Empowered Obliterate basically only discusses, the chance when Rhyme actually procs. This really only applies to that. So, Empowered Obliterate or Empowered Rhyme, however you want to look at it. Empowered Pillar of Frost. Pillar of Frost provides an additional 5% strength and no longer costs any runes. A great PvE buff there to Pillar of Frost. I mean, it's a great in PvP, but definitely more of a PvE buff there for Frost Death Knights and Warlords of Draenor. Improved Death Grip, great PvP Draenor perk here. The target of your Death Grip will now automatically have Chains of Ice applied to them. This is pretty cool. I mean, I really like the fact that it's an automatic Chains of Ice. I honestly cannot tell you because all of the target dummies are tagged here. I cannot tell you if it will root the target if you have Chillblains active, but it will apply Chains of Ice. The last Draenor perk is kind of lame. It's just a passive that increases Rune of Razor Ice deals additional 4% weapon damage when it triggers, and Rune of the Fallen Crusader increases strength by an additional 5%. So just a little small increase to the power of, the runes that you have available to you. Nothing too special. That leaves us with the talents of a Frost Death Knight. Going from top to bottom, as I mentioned earlier, Rolling Blood has been removed from the game because Blood Boil and Pestilence have all been merged into one. So Plague Bearer is the new talent to take its place. Death Coil and Frost Drake infect your target, adding 4 seconds to the duration of Frost Fever and Blood Plague, and adding an additional stack to Necrotic Plague. We'll discuss Necrotic Plague when we get to the bottom of the talent tree. Honestly, I don't see this being taken very much. I know right now that Plague Leech is the primary, talent on this level 56 tier. One of the reasons that I felt that Glyph of Outbreak would not be very popular is because you could take this Plague Bearer talent, and furthermore, we'll discuss Necrotic Plague when we get to it, but that is the replacement for Rolling Blood. On the level 57 tier, Lichborn, no longer will you be healing using Death Coil. In Warlords of Draenor, you will be healing using Leech. This is kind of annoying. I don't really like Leech. Basically, you attack and you get health back in return. I don't like how I don't like healing that way. Basically, the immunity to charm, fear, and sleep is still there, but you no longer turn undead, and you can no longer heal yourself using Death Coil. So that is the change to Lichborn. The level 60 talent tier has been changed quite a bit. This is the old 75 tier. As I mentioned, these two switch places. So they've changed how these activate. Before it was a flat 45% chance. Now it's for every 1.5 or for every runic power spent, you have a 1.5% chance to activate, in this case, a random fully depleted rune. So if you are using an ability that costs 30 runic power, that pretty much calculates into what it used to be. However, you are using Frost Strike, which only costs 25, so it ends up being a slight nerf to Frost. Runic Corruption is the same, same damage formula. I mean, not damage formula. The same formula change there is on Runic Corruption. Blood Tap has a little bit of a different formula change, but it's the exact same thing as the other two. It ends up being a slight nerf to Frost Strike instead of it being 30 focus. Sorry, not focus. Instead of it being 30 runic power cost, it ends up being 25, and so it ends up being a small nerf. Death Pact no longer requires you to have an undead minion to use. This is kind of, a needed change because Frost no longer had any access to a ghoul anymore, a free ghoul, and it was kind of absurd for them to use Army of the Dead to get Death Pact to heal them. So that has been changed. Also, since you no longer have to sacrifice your ghoul, notice that it says it heals the Death Knight for 50% of the max health and then absorbs incoming healing equal to 25% of max health. So it's a little bit of a trade-off there, but still pretty powerful heal. The level 90 tier, one change, Desecrated Ground now has immunity to roots and snares, in addition to abilities that cause loss of control. This is a great change. As I mentioned earlier, snares and roots are going to be very powerful in Warlords of Draenor, so this is an excellent change to kind of bring Desecrated Ground up to par with Remorseless Winter and Gorefiend's Grasp. I do see possibly PvPers taking this once they start to realize how many times they will be snared out there in the battlegrounds and arenas. The level 100 talents of a Death Knight are actually fantastic. They have some of the best in terms of level 100 talents. The first is Defile. You defile the ground targeted by the Death Knight. Every 1 second, if there are enemies standing in the defile, it deals 1800 Shadow Frost damage to them and grows in radius and damage by 2.5%. Enemies standing in your defile deal 10% less damage to you. I can tell you right now that on a standard patchwork fight, this is the talent that is being taken by all Death Knight specs. I'll go ahead and show it to you. It replaces Death and Decay, but here you go. And you will see it will expand in size and get bigger and bigger. So it's actually a really cool ability. Outside of the PvEers using it, I don't see it being used in PvP unless it's like a large-scale PvP situation, a large world PvP situation, maybe in Ashran. Necrotic Plague is the new talent on the left here, and it's the one that I discussed that really kind of affects Glyph of Outbreak. A powerful disease that deals 155 Shadow Frost damage per stack every 2 seconds for 30 seconds. Each time it deals damage, it gains 1 stack, and infects another nearby enemy within 8 yards if possible. You gain 2 runic power whenever a target infected with Necrotic Plague attempts to attack you. Replaces Blood Plague, Frost Fever, and is applied by any ability which applied either. This effect cannot be refreshed, and it gains 1 stack instead. So that's a huge mouthful, so I'll try and condense it for you. Basically, First thing you should know is that it combines your diseases. You only have one disease now. Secondly, the disease will start to spread by itself. Instead of having to use something like blood boil to spread diseases, it will spread by itself. I will show you this example right here. As I use Icy Touch, Necrotic Plague infects it, and it will spread to one, and then those two will spread to another, and then it'll infect the last one. It spreads like a plague. One person, two people, four people, 8, 16, 32. It, exponentially gets bigger. That's how it works. You should also know that you'll gain any runic power from anyone attacking you that has this plague, and it spreads pretty quickly, and it gains stacks. So right now the middle target right here has 14 stacks of Necrotic Plague. Each time it ticks, it's going to gain another stack, and that's how Necrotic Plague works. Probably the best part about this is that it combines your diseases into one, and when you have an ability like Howling Blast, that makes it extremely powerful. Check out the spell animation here with Howling Blast, but this is really powerful, and it's something that I really like, and I can see many Death Knights taking this in PvP just because of the power of that ability to spread those diseases, because of how Howling Blast applies Frost Fever, makes it really powerful. The last talent here is Breath of Sindragosa. This is going to be a very powerful burst damage ability, but Breath of Sindragosa continuously deals 5400 Shadow Frost damage every 1 second to enemies in a cone in front of you within 12 yards, and affects them with Mark of Sindragosa for 6 seconds. You will continue breathing until cancelled or runic power is exhausted. Mark of Sindragosa causes you to be healed for 10% of damage Mark of Sindragosa causes you to be healed for 10% of spell damage dealt by afflicted enemies. So I'll go ahead and use it here. You'll see how powerful it is. It's pretty good burst. I can see this being used more in smaller instance PvP. It's a large cooldown, hefty burst, and you can continue to generate runic power as you use it. Small AoE cone, but it's pretty powerful. And, that's Breath of Sindragosa. Honestly, with how Howling Blast interacts with diseases, I honestly would take Necrotic Plague without a doubt, but definitely 3 great talents for a Death Knight in Warlords of Draenor. That's everything dealing with Frost Death Knights in Warlords of Draenor. I hope I didn't miss anything. Otherwise, I will see you guys in the next video. Tearless out.